Tama, we're sick cad. Anita bivriop di pamadatum the kam. Anina minhaf, de banamits and kurani. Bemida burup, denimatimat of banatum. The punning to protat kane. The midivrio, a fitibath, the riap, jonik. That's the thing nobody tells you about being the quiet one in a family like mine. You get so good at being overlooked that eventually people stop pretending they see you at all. I'd spent 11 years at Hollowell and Associates. 11 years building client relationships, restructuring 2 departments that were hemorrhaging money, and personally negotiating the deal that brought in our largest account. But that night, standing in the Meridian Ballroom, surrounded by people I had worked alongside for over a decade, my name badge said guest. Not co-founder. Not chief operating officer. Not even staff. Guest. I noticed it the moment the check-in coordinator handed it to me with a polished smile. She didn't know. She was just doing her job, reading from a list. I pressed the badge onto my dress anyway, smoothed it flat, and walked into the room that my work had helped pay for. My sister's face was on every screen. They had done a full production. Scrolling text, professional photography, soft gold lighting over her portrait. Margot Hollowell Crane, incoming CEO. She looked exactly the way she always had. Polished, assured, the kind of beautiful that reads as capable even when it isn't backed by anything real. I watched the room tilt toward her the way rooms always did. My parents stood near the front, my mother in a deep burgundy gown she'd been planning for months, my father with his hand already halfway raised in a toast he hadn't given yet. I got myself a glass of sparkling water. I didn't take champagne. I'd learned years ago that keeping a clear head in rooms like this was the only advantage available to me. I want to be honest about something before I go further. I did not walk in expecting what happened next. I had suspicions. I had been watching the slow shift for nearly 2 years. The meetings I stopped being CE'd on, the clients who began addressing questions directly to my sister instead of me, the way my father had started saying, the girls, when he meant us. Lumping 11 years of my labor alongside Marco's 3 years of showing up to lunches and shaking hands. But I did not walk into that party with a plan. I want to be clear about that, because what came later was not something I engineered in anger. It was something I had built slowly, carefully, out of patience, and an instinct I couldn't quite name until the moment it became necessary. Margot found me about 40 minutes in, near the window that overlooked the hotel courtyard. She didn't look nervous. That was the first thing I noticed. Most people, even people who are about to do something unkind, carry some version of hesitation in their face. A flicker. A half second where the human part of them acknowledges what they're about to do. Margot had none of that. She walked up to me with the same expression she used for vendor calls. Pleasant, slightly distracted, efficiently warm. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I work here," I said. She laughed, like that was a charming thing to say. Then she took a small breath and tilted her head just slightly, the way she did when she was about to say something she'd rehearsed. "I wanted to tell you myself, before the announcement, we're restructuring the operations team. Your role is going to be eliminated. HR will have paperwork ready Monday morning. Tonight is..." She paused, glanced around the room. "Tonight is a celebration, so I didn't want it to be awkward. I just thought it was better coming from me." The room didn't freeze. That's not how it works in real life. The room kept going. Someone laughed at something near the bar. A waiter passed with a tray of bruschetta. My mother caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small wave, the kind she gave strangers. I looked at my sister for a long moment. "Okay," I said. She blinked. She had been ready for something else. Tears maybe, or raised voices, or at minimum the kind of quiet devastation that would let her feel generous. "Okay," gave her nothing. "I'll see you Monday," she said, recovering. "Sure," I said. I set my water glass down on the windowsill. I picked up my bag from the chair behind me, and I walked out of the Meridian Ballroom without saying goodbye to anyone. Here is what my family did not know about me. They knew the version of me that had always been useful, the one who stayed late, who read contracts carefully, who fixed problems before they became visible. They did not know that over the past 3 years, as I watched the company slowly being shaped into something that would one day not include me, I had started paying attention to different things. I had started paying attention to equity. When my father founded Hollowell and Associates 22 years ago, he structured it in the way a lot of founders do when they're optimistic and not yet experienced in what family can become, loosely. There were shares distributed across family members, a small portion set aside for key employees, and a clause that allowed shares to be sold privately with board notification but not board approval. It was the kind of clause that sounds reasonable in a room full of people who trust each other. It's the kind of clause that becomes significant when trust erodes. Over 31 months, I had quietly purchased shares from 3 separate minority shareholders, a retired partner who'd been looking for liquidity, an early employee who wanted to fund her daughter's medical school tuition, and my uncle, who had never been interested in the business and was relieved someone was willing to take the holding off his hands at a fair price. I paid out of my own savings. I did not tell anyone. I had a friend who was a corporate attorney, someone I'd known since college, someone with no connection to my family, and he structured each transaction properly, with full legal documentation. By the night of that party, I held 34% of the outstanding equity in Hollowell and Associates. My sister held 19%. My parents, combined, held 28%. The rest was distributed. I did not walk out of that ballroom in a rage. I walked out because there was nothing left to do there. I went to my car in the parking garage. I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes. Then I call him. "It happened?" I said. "Tonight? Just now. Officially eliminated." She said it herself. There was a short pause. "Okay," he said. "You know what that triggers." "I know." "Are you ready?" I looked out through the windshield at the concrete wall of the parking structure. I thought about the word guest on my badge. I thought about my mother's small wave from across a room I had helped build. "Send it," I said. The provision Callum had drafted, tucked inside the shareholder agreement amendment I'd quietly pushed through 18 months earlier, was specific. Any equity holder controlling more than 30% of outstanding shares could request an emergency board review of executive appointments within 30 days of a formal change in leadership. The request triggered a mandatory meeting. The meeting had to happen within 72 hours. By the time I pulled out of the parking garage, the email had gone to all 7 board members. By the time I got home, 3 had already replied. I didn't sleep much that night. That's the honest version. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about my father's face. Not the public version, the ballroom version, but the face he used to make when I was 12 and brought him a problem I'd already solved. He used to look at me like I was one of the smarter things he'd ever done. Somewhere over the past decade, that face had been replaced by a more careful one, the one he used with people he needed to manage. I thought about whether what I was doing was vindictive. I decided it wasn't. Not because I didn't feel hurt, I did. Not because I didn't want my sister to understand what she'd given up when she handed me a guest badge. I did want that. But what I was doing had a logic that existed outside of my feelings. I had built something. I had watched it being transferred away from me without my consent or input. I was simply using the tools that were available to me to make sure the transfer didn't complete. That's not revenge. That's architecture. The board meeting was held in the small conference room on the 14th floor, the one with the long oak table and the window that looked out over the east side of the city. I had sat in that room hundreds of times. I had run presentations in that room. I had stayed after everyone else left to fix proposals that weren't ready. I arrived 7 minutes early. I wore a gray dress I'd had for 4 years and a blazer I'd bought specifically because it made me look like someone who was not in a hurry. My sister arrived 2 minutes after I did. She sat down across from me and said nothing. Her jaw was set in the way it gets when she's trying not to look affected. My mother sat beside her. My father sat at the head of the table the way he always did, even though technically the head of the table was a board function now, not a family one. He looked at me before the meeting was called to order. Just for a moment. And I saw it. The old face, the one from when I was 12, confused and trying to recalibrate against something it hadn't expected. I looked back at him steadily. Callum opened the meeting. He wasn't officiating in his personal capacity. He was there as legal counsel for the majority equity holder, which was me. He walked through the provision, the documentation, the share transfer records, the formal request. He was thorough and calm and used almost no emotional language at all, because that's what the moment required. My mother said my name once in the middle of it. Just my name, nothing after it. My father said, "When did you?" and then stopped. Callum continued. The vote on the executive appointment review took 11 minutes. I won't walk through each vote in detail. What I will say is this: 3 of the 7 board members had come into that room already prepared. They had been watching the company's operational health for the past 2 years, and they were not unaware of who had been responsible for keeping it stable. When the documentation in front of them confirmed the equity structure, their votes were not difficult decisions. The final count was 5-2. Margot's appointment was suspended, pending a full executive review process open to qualified applicants. My sister stood up before the meeting was formally closed. She looked at me, really looked at me, the way she never quite had before. And I think for the first time she was actually seeing me instead of the idea of me she'd been carrying around for 30 years. "You planned this," she said. "I prepared," I said. "There's a difference. I want to tell you something about the weeks after, because I think it's the part that people don't expect." My mother didn't call me for 9 days. When she finally did, she didn't apologize. She asked me how I was doing in the tone of someone checking on a patient, careful and a little wary, like I had revealed myself to be someone she wasn't sure how to hold. That hurt in a different way than the party had. The party was sharp. The 9 days of silence was the kind of ache that sits low and takes time. My father came to my apartment on a Wednesday evening. He didn't call first. He knocked, and when I opened the door, he was holding a paper bag from the sandwich place on Clover Street that we used to go to when I was in high school. He handed it to me without saying anything. We ate at my kitchen table. We talked about nothing important for a while. Then he said, quietly, "I didn't see it happening." "I know," I said. "That's not an excuse." "I know," I said again. He left around 9. He hugged me at the door, the kind of hug that lasts a second longer than normal, the kind that's doing extra work. I stood in the hallway after he left and just breathed for a minute. The executive review process took 6 weeks. I applied. I was not the only applicant. The board was serious about the process, and I did not assume the outcome. There was a part of me that had prepared for the possibility of losing that too, of having done everything right and still ending up back at square one. The board voted 3 weeks later. I won't perform modesty about it. I had the qualifications, I had the history, and I had built a company that the board could verify with documentation. The decision wasn't sentimental. It was operational. When the letter came, I sat at my desk and read it twice. Then I put it down and looked out the window for a while. The city was doing what it always does, continuing, indifferent, full of people working through their own complicated things. I thought about what I would say if someone asked me whether it was worth it. Here's the answer I came back to. The shares weren't the point. The vote wasn't the point. The point was that for 11 years I had participated in a structure that subtracted me from my own story, and at some moment I had quietly decided not to let that continue. The badge that said guest was just the last thing in a long line of things. Power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't stand up at a party and make a toast. It sits in the documents that people rush through without reading. It lives in the structures that everyone assumes will stay the way they are until someone decides they shouldn't. I had decided. That's the whole story. There's one more thing I want to say, because I think it's important and I don't want to skip it to make myself look cleaner than I am. My sister and I don't talk much now. We're civil at family gatherings. My parents make sure of that. And honestly, I don't want a war. I never did. But the easiness we used to have, the way sisters have of talking in shorthand built over decades, that's gone. And I don't know if it comes back. I sit with that. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't cost me anything, because it does. But here's what I keep returning to. She had a choice that night at the party. She could have come to me differently. She could have said, "The board wants to make changes. I need your help navigating this." She could have done 100 things that didn't involve a guest badge and a pre-rehearsed dismissal in front of a room full of people who used to respect me. She made her choice. I made mine. And somewhere in that exchange, I became someone I actually recognize. Someone who stopped waiting for the family to see her and started building the kind of record that speaks on its own. That person doesn't need a badge that says anything at all. I've thought a lot about what the word patient actually means. Not patient like waiting for something to happen to you. Not patient like swallowing what you're given and calling it grace. I mean patient the way a person is when they've decided, quietly, without telling anyone, that they are going to build something that cannot be taken from them. That kind of patience isn't passive. It's one of the most active things a person can do. I was 31 years old when my sister handed me a guest badge in a room I'd spent a decade building. And the thing I want you to understand is that the badge didn't break me. It confirmed something I'd already known for a long time, that the people who love you can still diminish you, that family and fairness are not the same thing, that you can be surrounded by people who genuinely believe they see you and still be completely invisible to every one of them. What I did in the years before that party wasn't strategy in the cold, calculated sense. There was integrity. I kept showing up. I kept doing the work correctly even when I knew the credit was going elsewhere. I kept learning the structures, the legal ones, the financial ones, the ones that most people skip over because they're tedious and unsexy and nobody talks about them at dinner. I kept those documents. I kept those records. Not because I was planning a confrontation, but because I had decided at some point I can't exactly locate, that I was going to understand the thing I was building well enough that no one could hand it away without my knowing. That's what I want to say about intelligence as a practice. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the person who read the thing everyone else skimmed. Margot was not a stupid woman. My father was not a careless one. But neither of them had ever truly believed that the quiet person in the corner had been paying that kind of attention. That assumption, that the person who doesn't perform their power doesn't have any, is one of the most common and most costly mistakes people make. The ethics of what I did matter to me still. I didn't lie. I didn't manipulate. I bought shares from people who wanted to sell them, at fair prices, through legitimate channels. I used a provision that existed in a document that everyone in my family had signed. When the board voted, it was because the facts supported the outcome, not because I had engineered some emotional coup. I think that distinction is everything. There's a version of that story where I do the same thing out of pure bitterness, cutting corners, burning relationships just to win. That version would have cost me more than a guest badge ever could. The hardest part wasn't the vote. It was the 9 days my mother didn't call. It was learning that even when you do everything right, the people you love may still need time to forgive you for it. That's not injustice. That's just how complicated it is to be in a family, to be seen clearly after years of being seen wrong. What carries me through it is this. I know who I am now in a way I didn't before that night. Not because I won something, but because I was tested at the exact point where most people give in, where the easier thing would have been to go home, cry, and let it go, and I found out I was someone who had already done the work. That's the only thing that can't be taken from you. Not the shares, not the title. The work you've already done and the person it made you into. That belongs to you, fully, regardless of what any badge says.